Just at the beginning of this month, on the 4th of July, you will have seen in the news in Texas, there was a terrible tragedy. One news outlet puts it like this: early on the 4th of July, record-setting flash floods swept away 27 girls at the Christian camp Mystic in Hunt, Texas. Christians across the state and the country prayed as rescue teams navigated the flooded roads to retrieve hundreds of campers in disaster areas. When water levels rose 26 feet in 45 minutes. By Saturday evening, at least 5, 8 and 9-year-old campers and an 18-year-old counsellor have been reported dead. The death toll across the area rose to over 100 people, including 28 children, with recovery efforts ongoing. And then on the 17th of July, just turn my microphone on the 17th of July in Minehead, we read this: a child has died and 2 others have been seriously injured after a coach bringing pupils back from an end-of-term school trip flipped onto its roof and slid down a bank. The coach was carrying about 70 people, many of them pupils from Minehead Middle School, with 21 passengers in total taken to hospital. Back in 2019, on the 15th of February, there was another event that shocked the world. 21 Coptic Christians in orange jumpsuits were led along the beach in Libya by their Islamic State captors. They were given one last chance to renounce their faith in Jesus Christ. When they refused, each of them was beheaded by their captors. Their last words were, "Ya Rabbi Yasu, my Lord Jesus." Just 3 events, and you could go on and on and on, multiplying events like that. I'm sure, like me, you ask this question: where was God? Where was God in any of those events? There are events that happen in our own lives that maybe not so dramatic as those that make the national news. Perhaps a loved one becomes seriously ill and all our prayers seem hopeless. Perhaps we fail to be offered a job for which we'd applied, which, as far as we were concerned, was perfect for us, but it never happened. Perhaps our children make some bad choices and we wish we could stop them, but we can't, and they bear the consequences of those bad choices. Wickedness seems to flourish while good often does not. Where is God? Where is He? Our difficulty in asking that question hopefully will go some way to answering it as we consider Daniel chapter 3. But a large part of our difficulty in answering that question is that we're thinking wrongly. We're wrong-headed in our question. We give God in our minds only one option. God ought to be doing this. God should do that. God should lead His people to health, wealth, success, and happiness. What we're really saying is, God's glory actually ought to revolve around me. Our understanding of God's love revolves around me, not God. Sometimes it's a very, very hard journey to learn that God may have other plans from the ones that we have. Not so very many years ago, a very good friend of Andy and Kirsty and mine, who was principal of the theological college Andy and I went to, but he was principal when Andy was there, just died very suddenly. He was a young man. He just died. He was up here as an intellect. He was one of the greatest Christian thinkers of our time, I truly believe. He was able to fight the battles that we needed to fight. And he was taken just like that. What are you doing, God? I wasn't the only one to ask that question. What are you doing? Do you remember, you may remember way back in the 1970s, the popular books written by a lady called Joni Eareckson. Many of you will remember her. Christian girl, dived into a lake in the summer for a swim, hit her head on the ground and broke her neck. And she was a quadriplegic. But God was glorified through that. It took her a long time to come to terms with it, but she actually has achieved far more through that than she otherwise would have done. And there are many people I've lost over my ministry when I've thought, that person is a future leader. And overnight they're gone. Where is God? What is he doing? In all these things and in all these questions, we need to remember above all one thing, and it's a thing that's all the way shot through the book of Daniel, and it is this: God is sovereign, not me, not the prime minister, not the king, not Nebuchadnezzar. God is sovereign, and it is God who holds the world in his hands. He has not lost the plot simply because he doesn't do things that we think he should. That doesn't mean he's taken his eye off the ball. God knows what he is doing, and frequently we don't understand it, but God does. This is what we learn from this passage today. These three men in a fiery furnace. We have a story of 4 AAs. Okay, the first AA is this: astonishing arrogance. Astonishing arrogance. Now, before we get to chapter 3, we had read at the end of chapter 2 that Nebuchadnezzar had been humbled. Just look at chapter 2 and verse 46. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and paid homage to Daniel, and commanded that an offering and incense be offered up to him. The king answered and said to Daniel, "Truly your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, and a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery." Nebuchadnezzar had an experience of God, and he knelt down before God and praised God. That's a good thing, isn't it? But it's not quite good enough. Because the very next thing we read is this: King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its breadth 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He made an enormous gold statue. It was an image of something. Now, we assume it was an image of himself. It may not have been. We're not told exactly what it was an image of. But it was something, and it was probably himself, because that was fairly common practice in those days, to draw attention to yourself and to your greatness and to your might and to your power. So he made this huge gold statue. And then he told people they had to worship it. Verse 4. And the herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the hornpipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. For whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning, fiery furnace." Whatever this image was, people had to worship it. But that worship was an abomination to those who were faithful to the true God. Verse 12 tells us this: "Therefore, certain Jews whom you've appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, these men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. It was an abomination to them because they worshipped the one true God. They weren't going to bow down and worship an idol. That's contrary to the Ten Commandments, isn't it? But let's just think about this for a moment. Just imagine how glorious a sight that must have been. Abomination to God aside. A huge golden statue shining in the sun. See it for miles around because it was set in the middle of this plain. You couldn't miss it. A golden image. Wonderful music playing all around it with all these instruments. Great orchestras playing music. And people united together in worship of the statue. A truly wonderful and spectacular atmosphere of worship. It must have been. A person would have had to be extremely narrow-minded not to share in the sheer magnificence of the occasion, the splendor, the assault on all the senses. But unity and splendor in worship does not make that worship good or right. What makes worship good or right is the object, the focus of that worship. That's what matters, not the state of the worshippers. The worship, however splendid, was completely and utterly blasphemous. It was an abomination to God. Splendid though it looked. Now we need to step back a minute, don't we, and remember that Nebuchadnezzar had been humbled before God at the end of chapter 2. So why on earth did he do this in chapter 3? What made him do it? Well, we know from chapter 2 that he'd had a dream that he couldn't remember or didn't want to tell people, and Daniel had interpreted it. And it was in that dream that Nebuchadnezzar had been told that he was the greatest on earth. Look back in chapter 2 and verse 31. You saw, O king, and behold, a great image. This image, mighty and of exceeding brightness, stood before you, and its appearance was frightening. The head of this image was of fine gold. So here's an image with a head of fine gold, and then down to verse 37. You, O king, the King of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the might, and the glory, and into whose hand he has given wherever they dwell, the children of man, the beasts of the field, and the birds of the heavens, making you rule over them all. You are the head of gold. Wow. Imagine being told that. You've got everything you want. You're a head of gold. You're an outstanding person in the world. You're the most powerful man in the world. Now, clearly, Nebuchadnezzar's subsequent humility didn't last very long, did it? Because his mind went back to this dream. I'm the head of gold. I'm the greatest person in all the world. I need to build a statue to myself. Humility can be so short-lived at times. And we hear what we want to hear and turn it back on ourselves. Aren't I great? He remembered only what he wanted to. This is important. He had had an experience of God. There is no doubt about that. Your God is the greatest, he said to Daniel. He had been humbled by God. There's no doubt about that. Yet all he can think about, despite that, was himself. He made the whole dream about himself and his glory. Now, before we get too harsh on Nebuchadnezzar, though we should be, let's remember that we're all human beings? Isn't this a tray of humanity? How often can we be like that? Do we ever simply only hear what we want to hear? God is love. But I'm going to define what love is. God is gracious to me. God is sovereign for me. We can make it so easily all about me, just as Nebuchadnezzar did. The result of doing that is confusion and disappointment, unanswered questions and difficulty understanding what God is doing. When God doesn't behave the way I want him to, or when the Bible tells me that I'm doing something I shouldn't be doing, and I have to change. Astonishing arrogance. That's the first AA. The second AA in this passage is this: absolute allegiance. Absolute allegiance. Now, for some, the worship of God, the God of heaven, was above all else. Whatever the cost, worshipping God came first. Now, please notice that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were loyal citizens. They were senior leaders in the land, high-placed officials. But when that contradicted their worship of God, it's God who comes first. Whatever the cost. Whatever the cost. And so, in verse 12, again, we read this: there are certain Jews whom you've appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you, and they do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. There's a slight bit of exaggeration there. It's not that they're not paying any attention to Nebuchadnezzar. They were his senior officials. But it is true that they were not worshipping his gods. Now, it's worth asking this question. Where's Daniel? This book is about Daniel, isn't it? It's called Daniel. Where is he? He doesn't come in chapter 3, I don't think. Where's he gone? Well, presumably, he was faithful too. We know from the rest of the book of Daniel, it's likely he was faithful too. But God had other plans for Daniel, and we'll find out what they were later in the book. See, the important thing is this: God uses different people in different ways at different times. This was not Daniel's time. This was time for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to glorify God. So in the end, we don't know where Daniel was. We don't know if he was supporting them in the wings or whatever he was doing. He's not even mentioned. But we do know that God chose these three, ultimately for his glory. We've already seen they held high office, and their persecution would not have gone unnoticed. To throw these three officials in the fiery furnace, that would have been quite a statement from Nebuchadnezzar for them to die. Now, for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, it may have looked fairly arbitrary on the ground. Don't you think? Why me? All those other people. There's Daniel and presumably lots of other people that were getting away with it. Why me? Why not him? Why have I got to do this? Well, clearly they stood out as faithful. But it was that faithfulness that could have led to a horrible death. Where is God now? Where is God now for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Bear in mind, they don't know the end yet. Despite the threat against them, they remained faithful. They didn't try and wheedle out of it, to try and find a way around to worship the idol and somehow say, well, actually, I'm worshipping God in my heart. No, that wouldn't have been good enough, would it? Their absolute allegiance to God. And it's an allegiance that in the end didn't depend on God acting to save them. So not an allegiance because God was going to save them, because they had, our third AA, an assured acceptance. They had an assured acceptance of what God was going to do. They were totally confident that God would save them. Look at verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. They had confidence that God had them in their hands. They believed that God could deliver them. But at the same time, they knew that the outcome might not be quite what they would want. Because in verse 18 they say this, but if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Now listen carefully to what they're saying. God will deliver us. I've got faith God will deliver us. But even if he doesn't, he's still God. Even if he doesn't, we're still right to worship him. Whatever happens to us, God is still God. He should be worshipped. Whatever happens. That is true faith in God. It's not faith in God because of what he does or because of what he has done. It's faith in God because of who he is. See, God can heal, there is no doubt. God can change my circumstances, there is no doubt. God can save me from catastrophe, there is no doubt. But he may not. There may be a greater reason why he may not choose to do those things in his sovereign providence. Whether he does or not, he is still God. Whether tragedies happen in Texas that we can't get our heads around, God is still God. Whether tragedies happen in Minehead and young children are injured and killed, God is still God. Whether 21 martyrs are martyred on a beach in the most horrible way in Libya, God is still God. Too many people, too many of us have a fair weather faith in God. We're happy when things are going well. Isn't God great? My life is so good. But I often hear, as anybody in ministry will often hear statements like this. I used to believe in God, but then my friend died. I can't believe in a God that would do that. I used to believe in God, but then my marriage failed. My wife, my husband left me. I can't believe in a God that would do that. I used to believe in God, but then something bad happened to me. I can't believe in God now. That's not faith in a sovereign God. That's not true biblical faith. True biblical faith says, God is God. Whatever happens to me, whatever goes on in the world, God is still God. And I worship him and glorify him, not because of what he does or has done, but because of who he is. And so, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, through their assured acceptance, pay the price for their faithfulness. Verse 20. He ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Where is God now? You can hear Nebuchadnezzar shouting after them, where's your God now? I'm the greatest. Your God has lost. Look. They clearly hoped that God would act, but their faith didn't depend on it. And then God responds with our fourth AA, which is this: almighty action. What have we had? We've had astonishing arrogance. We've had absolute allegiance. We've had assured acceptance. And now, almighty action. Verse 24. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" They answered and said to the king, "True, O king." He answered and said, "But I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they're not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods." Who is the 4th man? He threw 3 men into the fire, and there was a 4th man there with them. Who is it? Looks like God, says Nebuchadnezzar. It is God himself, walking with his people through tragedy, through pain, through judgment. It is God stepping in to rescue his faithful people, not for their glory, not so that people will say how great they were, but for God's glory. Isaiah in chapter 43 and verse 2 wrote this: "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you." This is the truth of that, isn't it? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego knew the truth. Whatever life throws at you, God will be with you if you trust him and are faithful to him. God gives grace when grace is needed. We're just called to be faithful, to trust him. The Apostle Paul knew that, didn't he? When he wrote in Romans chapter 8 about the sufferings of Jesus. Here is Jesus suffering on the cross. And it was all God's plan. Where was God then? Well, he was there. In Romans chapter 8, Paul writes this: "He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also with him graciously give us all things?" In verse 38, "For I am sure that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord." When you walk through the fire, I will be with you. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego proved that. And the result was amazing. It was almighty action. In this case, verse 28, Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own. Therefore, I make a decree. Any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins, for there's no other God who is able to rescue in this way." Well, thank you, Nebuchadnezzar. Not quite what we'd necessarily intend, but the principle's there, isn't it? Who gets the glory? It is God. God was glorified again and again and again in the book of Daniel. God is greater than the greatest king in all the earth, who is Nebuchadnezzar. Now, it's the most amazing passage, this one. There is so much in here that is a real challenge to us and encouragement to us as well. So let me just leave you with a few questions. How is your relationship with God? Is it based around you? Do you expect God to do what you want him to do? Do you expect God to act how you want him to act? Do you say, if God is a God of love, he should do what I say? Is it based around you? Or is it centered on him? Not what he does, but who he is. Is there something that you need to change today while it's still in your mind? Do you need to be humbled about something like Nebuchadnezzar was? Do you need to pray through a situation that you haven't dared think about because it's so painful? You can't bring yourself to pray about it because it's so painful even to think about it. Well, you can, because God is God. God is sovereign. You need to be humbled before him. And is there someone that you know who needs to be encouraged by this? To know that whatever has gone on, whatever goes on, whatever will go on, whatever happens, God is still God. That we worship him not for what he's done, but for who he is. If you know somebody that needs to hear that today, go and tell them. Let's bow our heads to pray.